Okay. Uh, Welcome everybody. Tonight we're going to speak about, we'll do two topics. We'll start off talking about uh, Asarah Beteves because that's what's happening on Friday. So we're having a fast, Asarah Beteves. So I learned some interesting stuff this year I wanted to share with everybody. And then we will continue our halachos of Shabbos. We're going to do the malacha of Lash. Lash is kneading. So that's the schedule for tonight. First, Asarah Beteves, and then we'll talk about Lash. So Asarah Beteves is the fast for on the 10th of Teves, and there's a very interesting people like to quote this very interesting comment of the Abu Draham. Abu Draham was a work authored by a 14th century Spanish posek, David David Abu Draham, um, or David Abu Draham. He says that if Asar B'Teves would fall out on Shabbos, the fast would be observed on Shabbos. Um, you know, nowadays it's once the calendar was already made in place by Chazal, so it can't be that a Sarbat can never fall out on Shabbos. But the Abu Draham says if it were to fall out on Shabbos, we would still do the fast. So it's an interesting comment because other public fast days that fall out on Shabbos are usually postponed to Sunday, like Tisha B'Av, for example. So why is Asar B'Teves different than other fast days? That's the question. Um, so Beis Yosef points out the Beis Yosef, he mentions the Avraham, and he points out that in the Gemara and Megillah, Rashi writes that all fast days, including Asar B'Teves, are pushed off when they fall out on Shabbos. But he notes Abu Draham that if Asar B'Teves falls out on Shabbos, it will not be pushed off. And Abu Draham says it's based on a pasuk in Yechezkel that says that when the Babylonians laid siege on Yerushalayim, it was Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, in the midst of this day. So he says this phrase indicates the significance of this particular date, and therefore the fast of Asar B'Teves is never delayed. Um, and it's interesting that the same expression of Etzem Hayom Hazeh in the middle of this day also appears in the Torah when describing Yom Kippur, and Yom Kippur is also never postponed. So that's the Abu Draham, but the Beis Yosef, he questions this. He says he doesn't really understand why this would be true. And in fact, I heard today from Rav David Hirsch in YU. He was giving us a chabura. He quoted this Abu Draham, and he said Rav Soloveitchik thought that Abu Draham was a typo. He said this was a mistake. It can't be that you would ever fast on Shabbos. Um, but I read this idea from Rav Chaim Brisker. So I mean, who seemed to give an explanation to to this Abu Draham. This is what he says. He says that really, when necessary, a fast can actually take place on Shabbos. This, he says, he gives a proof. He says that when someone has to fast a tainis chalom, let's say they had a disturbing dream, so they wanted to fast, so that they could fast on Shabbos because the fast is most effective the same day as a dream. So if that's true, if really we could fast on Shabbos, so then why do we usually push off the fast? So he says Shiva Sarbat Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, for example, are postponed when they fall out on Shabbos because the reason we fast is that on those dates is based on the Navi and Zechariah. He refers to Shiva Sarbat Tammuz as the fast of the fourth month, which is Tammuz, and Tisha B'Av is the fast of the fifth month. Um, so, but he says that since the Navi identifies those fast days by the month and not by the calendar date, so Chaim said it appears that Tammuz and Av were selected for fasting because they were periods of tragedy and specific dates were only chosen later to establish uniformity. So when the fasts fall on Shabbos, the fasts are delayed because the month remains the same, and the day of month is of secondary importance. Meaning, when it comes to if we're gonna push out, if we have we have Shabbos versus this exact date to fast, so we care less about the actual date of the 9th of Av, or we care less about the actual date of the 17th of Tammuz, but we just care about that it stay in the same month. So we're willing to push it off to Sunday. But in contrast, regarding Asar B'Teves, which is falling out on this Friday, since Yechezkel emphasized this particular day, in the midst of this day. So he writes that it is clear that the 10th of Teves is of special significance, and therefore the fast is observed even on Shabbos, just as a Tainis Chalom, a fast for a dream, would be observed on Shabbos. So that was an interesting idea. Wanted to share. And then there's another interesting idea that so the following question that, let's say someone who, when they cook for Shabbos, they always taste the soup or other dishes they make to see if they need to add more spices. So, this Friday is going to be a fast day. So are you allowed to taste the food? That's the question. So the Mishnah Brewer writes that, generally there's a mitzvah on Arab Shabbos, taste the food, make sure it's properly, tastes good. Um, but the Shulchan Aruch writes that on a fast day, the Shulchan Aruch says on a fast day, let's say Yom Kippur Tisha B'Av, one may taste a small amount of food as long as it's spit out, not swallowed. That's the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch. So Sephardim would be able to do that. But the Ramah, the Ashkenazi posek, writes that on a public day, on public fast day, food may not be placed in the mouth, even if the intention is to spit out. So it seems that if on Friday, if someone wants to taste food, so you'd have to ask them, are you Sephardi? If you're Sephardi, then yeah, you could taste it. If you're Ashkenazi, then you can't. But the Mishnah Brura, he quotes the Chai Adam, that he says, if one is preparing for a Sudas mitzvah, and without tasting the food, it will not be possible to tell if it was spiced properly, one may rely on the Shulchan Aruch and taste the food and immediately spit it out. This same leniency not only applies for Sudas mitzvah, but he says it applies to preparing the Shabbos Suda as well. So therefore, this Friday, if you want to taste your food, even though the Rama would say you shouldn't do it, Mishnah Brura brings from Chai Adam that even an Ashkenazi could taste the food as long as they spit it out and don't swallow it. So you can do that this Friday, even though it's a fast day. Okay, that's on Asarah Beteves. Now we'll talk about Lush. Lush is kneading. Lush is Lamed Shin. Um, as that's it means to knead. It's one of the 39 malachos. It's when you take a bunch of tiny pieces and join them together with a liquid. Um, the liquid can be any type of binding agent. And the solid is, mostly like food particles that when you mix together with this liquid, it would become a solid mass. So if you think about examples would be like egg salad, uh, tuna fish. Those would be examples. If someone may be making oatmeal, so are those going to be things which are permitted on Shabbos or not? So there's when it comes to malacha of lush, there's a very famous this is the machlokes in this topic, um, which relates to every discussion that comes in regard to lush. So machlokes in two places in the Gemara and Shabbos between Rebbe and Rebbe Yossi, Rebbe Yehuda. That's the machlokes between. So when it comes to kneading, if you want to knead something, let's say you're making a dough, so there's two steps. Step one is you have to take the ingredients, right? You take the flour and you would take the water and you would pour the water on the flour. That would be step one. And step two would be you'd have to mix it together. So when does the machlokas is when does the malach of lush, when is that violated? So Rebbe says when you put water into the flour, you've already violated the malacha of lush. You've already started the kneading process, and therefore you violated a biblical malacha. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda he says no, you need to have an actual act of kneading in order to violate the malacha of lush. You know, this could be explained maybe that Rebbe understands that doing anything significant in the process of kneading is when the malacha occurs. So as soon as I pour in water, I've started the process of kneading, and therefore I am liable. Rebbe Yehuda seems to be of the opinion that no, you're only liable when you totally complete the malacha. So that's machlokes. It comes up twice. The question is, who's right? Who do who do we paskin like? And of course, that's a debate among the Rishonim. It is very interesting because it seems to be there are different rules. You know, whenever there's a machlokes in the Gemara, so the commentaries, the Rishonim, they have in general they have a klalei psak. They have rules which determine how to determine what the halacha is. So sometimes whenever we have a machlokes between let's say like Abaye and Rava, whenever Abaye and Rava argue, so we always pass like Rava except for certain cases. So there are rules like that. So it's interesting when certain rules are pinned up against each other, which ones are going to win. So it depends, different opinions on that. So the opinion of the Rambam here is that we paskin like the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, which would mean that you're not obligated until you have not violated lush until you actually mix it. So why does the Rambam say that's true? Because it seemed to me that there's two different Mishnayos. Um, that contradict each other. One Mishnah in the beginning of the Gemara and Shabbos seems to be going like the opinion of Rebbe, and the second Mishnah seems to be going like the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. So the first Mishnah is saying that you have violated lush, you have done kneading as soon as you pour in water, and the second Mishnah says no, you are only liable when you're mixing. So the Rambam says that the further into is a very interesting opinion, but he seems to be of the opinion that the further into a tractate of Gemara, the further into the Masechta that you go, the more authoritative the Mishnayos become. So even though the different Mishnahs are contradicting each other, right? The first Mishnah is saying you've done lush as soon as you pour in water, but since the Mishnah later on in the Gemara and Shabbos, right, the same Masechta seems to contradict it, so we go by the second one. That's what the Rambam seems to be of the opinion. But the Sefer HaTruma, he says, no, okay, I agree with you, Rambam, that there's two Mishnahs that are contradicting each other, but there's no rule that you go by. There's no rule that you go by the second one. It's just, it's a wash. It's this one against this one. So the different Mishnayos don't tell me anything, but we have a different rule. We have a rule that says halacha ki Rebbe mi chavero. Whenever I have Rebbe, right, Rebbe was one of these opinions. Rebbe was arguing against a different Tana in Shas. We usually follow Rebbe over the other one, so that's why the Sefer Truma says we're going to follow Rebbe, and therefore you're going to violate a lush as soon as you put water in. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, does Sefer Truma actually cite the Rambam, or he just talks about this discussion?
I don't think he cites the Rambam here.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, but that's just the way I said it. But no, yeah. So the Sefer Truma would seem to be of the opinion that that a that the reason why we follow Rebbe then it is because we follow Rebbe over another Tana. We have two Mishnayos that contradict each other. We follow Rebbe, and therefore you have violated lush as soon as you've added the liquid. So because of this, it would seem we might actually be worried for both. Let's say you were making oatmeal, right? So we'd have to worry about two parts. We'd have to be worried when you put the water in, right? Or if you're gonna put the water in first, when you put the oats in, right? And then you'd also have to be worried about when you mix it. We don't know who's right. So we'll see how the Shulchan Aruch and Ramah how they write it. But before we get that, one more aspect from the Gemara. The Gemara, um, the Gemara says that although we're worried about this malacha of lush, the Gemara assumes in multiple places that to do a shinoi, to do this malacha of lush mixing, um, in a abnormal way, actually accomplishes a great deal. That although normally we're not so willing to be lenient, especially on a biblical a violation, even if we do something in it with a shino, even if we do something in a abnormal manner. But the Gemara Shabbos says that if you're going to do a shinoi um for mixing for lush, it actually makes it completely mutter. The Gemara has different examples of what a shinoi might be. The Gemara says in one place that doing it al yad, um, which would a hand on a hand, that's what it literally means, would make lush. If you do it yad al yad, it would be mutter. Um, so the question is, what does that mean? So the Rif says that means do a little at a time. Some say that means if you do it, really, if you just do it in an abnormal way, it just means doing it in the shinoi. Um, so that's one example of doing of a shinoi. Another one the Gemara has is that changing the order of what goes in first would actually work as a shinoi in certain situations. And then another example of the Gemara has where there's a shinoi is that, the Gemara in Shabbos discusses taking crushed garlic and mixing it with oil. You want to make like some sort of garlic dip on Shabbos. So the Gemara says you can mix it strongly, but if you're gonna do me'urav, which means have it like mix on its own or maybe mix it gently, then that would not be a problem. So, even in the Gemara, the Gemara seems to allow you to do lush, to do this kneading, mixing, in certain ways if you're gonna do them a little bit abnormally. Okay, so how do we what is the Shulchan Aruch? How do we paskin? So the Shulchan Aruch says that you know, makes sense. He postulates like the Rambam. What did the Rambam say? The Rambam held that the only thing that matters is the mixing. He postulated like Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. So he says the Shulchan Aruch writes, putting in water is not relevant because only the mixing matters. However, he says there is opinion that it's only permitted to mix it if there's already water beforehand. Meaning, he's saying there is the opinion of the Sefer Truma, which is stringent not to even add in water. The Ramah, he paskins like the Sefer Truma as well. He says you need to do a shino, you need to do something abnormal, both when you put in the water and when you mix it. Um, so there's one more part to discuss before we get into what actually to do, which is that there are different types of mixtures, and that becomes very relevant. So there's like four different categories of what type of mixtures you might have. So we'll start from least to strongest in terms of violation. So let's say you have this is called like chatichos gdolos, like big pieces. So you know a salad with its dressing, where any mixture where the solid particles can be identified easily. When you mix them, that's not called any sort of mixture at all, right? If salad and dressing, is that called mixing? No, is that called lush? That's not really lush because you're not really you see all the parts of your salad with your dressing. It doesn't form really one mixture. So the Mishnah Berurah says that's not going to be a problem of lush at all. Um, and the totally opposite spectrum is let's say you have something which you mix and it's like a totally watery sort of mixture. So examples of this would be um, chocolate milk. You milk with chocolate syrup, or if you're making hot chocolate, or you're making like a vinegar salad dressing or baby formula. So all those things are not examples of lush because it's not coming to form one new thing. It's just you're making a very liquidy mixture. Um, so what is violations if you don't do it correctly of lush are what we call a blila racha or a blila ava. So blila racha means like a thin mixture, and blila ava is like a thick mixture. And the way it's defined, Chazon Ish, he defines a belila racha. What's called a thin mixture is that anything that is one mass, but you can still pour. So examples of this would be ketchup, like applesauce or pancake batter. So that's going to be called lush. That's going to be kneading, but that's less strict of a of a kneading. And then there's the most strict level, which is a blila ava, thick enough mixture. It's a very thick mixture that it does not even pour or flow so well. So the examples of that would be like a challah dough, babka dough. So that might be the only malacha of lush of kneading deraisa. That's what the Mishnah Berurah writes. Um, so the post can say that whether you're talking about a thin mixture or a thick mixture, you should still try to do a shinoi, like the Ramah says, to do a shinoi both when you put in the water, or the liquid, or when you do the mixing. You should do a shinoi at both. But the Mishnah Berurah writes that that really really you should really the shinoi only works for when you have a thinner mixture. When you have a thick mixture, the shinoi doesn't really a shinoi wouldn't really work for putting in the liquid. um so he says that he kind of permits it in time of great need, but he doesn't really like it. So okay, so let's say you're talking about making a thin mixture. Um, or they say like let's say you want to make a oatmeal on Shabbos, or baby cereal. So Rav Solovsky said, the first thing to know is that you should try to make it into a little more liquidy than and as liquidy as you can, because once you're going to make it more liquidy, then it's going to become a lower level of a blila racha, and then it's going to be a lot less problematic. But if it's a thick mixture, then that's much more problematic. But so okay, so how do you do a shinoi? So part one, right? You have to do a shinoi when you put in the liquid. So the Gemara said that what you do is change the order of what's placed in the bowl. And the Shulchan Aruch says changing the order of the ingredients um, that are placed in the bowl is in fact a shinoi. The question is, what if you don't know what goes in first? Some people like to put in their cereal in the bowl first. Some people like to put in their milk, right, first. That probably wouldn't be lush anyways, but I'm just saying that as an example. So the Shabbos Kitchen, he quotes from Rosh Steinberg. He says, sometimes they give you instructions on the back of the package. Oatmeal, for example, they say first put in the oatmeal and then add water. Or sometimes they say first put in water and then add an oatmeal. So whatever the back of the package says, you do the opposite, and then you have a shinoi. Or if there's no common practice, so the Chazon Ish, he's very machmir, says if there's no common practice, then do a shinoi. Um, Mishnah Berurah says if there's no standard practice, you should do a solid first and then liquid, because the Gemara said that was a shinoi, to first do the solid and then the liquid. Um, so the Ramosha said you can rely on the Mishnah Berurah if you need to. Otherwise, hold like the Chazon Ish. Yeah. So try to change the order. So that's part one. What about part two? When you're part two when you're doing the mixing. So there's a lot of different, right? The Gemara mentioned a lot of different types of shinois, of different abnormal ways you could do it. So the Shulchan Aruch quotes number one. He says do it in like a crisscross up and down instead of a circular motion. That might be a shinoi. The Chazon Ish says that means you have to, like, let's say you're using a fork, pick it up every time, otherwise you're going to be a circular motion. So that might be a shinoi. Or another example Shulchan Aruch says is pour from, instead of mixing it, mix it by pouring from one vessel into the other, and by doing that, that's how you mix it. That's definitely an abnormal way of mixing it. So that would be a shinoi. Another one is maybe mixing your hand. So the Ramah writes, don't use a spoon, you instead mix with your hand. Of course, if it's something which is normally be mixed with your hand, then that's not really a good shinoi. Rav Moshe writes the handle of a spoon might be a good shinoi. And in the Gemara quoted, maybe mixing it softly is a shinoi. It's hard to know exactly what it means to mix softly. Um, so when it comes to a blila racha, thin type of liquid, so any of these shinois are good enough. Which is why post can tell you to add in water to your mixture, so that way it becomes much lower, and then these shino requirements are very low. When it comes to a thicker mixture, then it would seem there's no requirement, meaning the shinoi of the reason why I think thicker mixture is a bigger problem is because the Gemara only mentioned that you can do the shinoi of changing the order when it came to the Gemara said explicitly that that only works when you have a thin mixture, but it doesn't work when you have a thick mixture. So then you have a problem because you're never going to be able to have a shinoi at the moment that that you add in the actual liquid. And then, the Ramat said that you should be machmir for the Sefer Truma, who said that's a problem, right? So there's always going to be a little bit of a problem there. And so that's always a question. So people ask like how do you make egg salad on Shabbos? Um, so say you should mix up the order of the ingredients and do a shinoi at the time that you're mixing it. Um, Hasidim think it seems to be a little bit like Hasidim always apparently they just make a lot of it. They make egg salad on Shabbos, and misnagdim are a little less likely. That's what Rabbi Leibowitz told us in shir. It the same thing would be true. Seem to be true about tuna fish. That would fall in the same category. Um, what are there other examples? Baby cereal. People say, make it a little more liquidy and then, first change in the ingredients and then mix it up in a crisscross way. Um, something like a potato salad, that's going to be totally permitted. That's not going to be lush because you could see all the ingredients. Um, what else do we have here? Baby formula. That's not even lush at all because, that's purely liquid. Oatmeal, right? So again, something like oatmeal, you make it more liquidy, and then change the order of whatever is normal, and then mix it up in a abnormal way. Do it like crisscross, something like that. So that seems to be that's the halachas for lush. And I think next week we'll start talking about which will probably be on this topic for a while. We'll talk about the halachas of cooking on Shabbos, which is, you know, a lot to talk about. And